Daniel Cross never believed in fate. He believed in control, timing, and winning. That was why, on a quiet Friday night, he chose the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan to celebrate his 8th wedding anniversary with Vanessa. Crystal lights reflected off the glass walls, soft piano music floated through the air, and everything looked exactly the way a successful man's life was supposed to look. Until his fork froze in midair. Across the room, by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, sat a woman Daniel had not seen in 8 years. Catherine Miller. She looked different. Calmer, stronger, the kind of woman who no longer waited for approval. Sitting beside her was a tall man in a tailored dark suit, his posture relaxed but unmistakably powerful. And between them, on a velvet chair, sat a boy. Daniel's heart slammed hard against his ribs. The boy was about 8 years old. Dark hair, sharp brows. The same small crease between the eyes that Daniel saw every morning in the mirror. The way the child held his fork slightly angled, careful, almost identical. Vanessa was talking, laughing softly, unaware that her husband had gone completely pale. "Daniel," she whispered. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer. Because, at that exact moment, the boy looked up. His eyes met Daniel's across the room. Not with fear, not with curiosity, but with innocent confusion. The boy leaned closer to Catherine and asked, clearly, loudly enough to carry through the quiet elegance of the restaurant, "Mom, why does that man keep staring at us?" The word "mom" hit Daniel like a punch. Catherine didn't turn around right away. She took a slow sip of water, her hand steady. Only then did she follow her son's gaze. Her eyes met Daniel's just for a second. There was no shock in them, no anger, only distance. She smiled faintly at the boy and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart, he's no one you need to know." Beside her, the man Daniel had never seen before placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder and said calmly, "Finish your dessert, son." Son. That single word crushed something deep inside Daniel. Vanessa finally followed his stare, then stiffened. She leaned in and whispered, her voice sharp with unease. "Who is that woman?" Daniel couldn't answer. Because in that moment, he knew. The child he once forced Catherine to erase from her life was sitting right there, alive, laughing softly, and calling another man, Dad. Daniel forced himself to breathe, but the air felt thick, heavy, almost hostile. Across the table, Vanessa was still waiting for an answer, her manicured fingers tightening around the stem of her wine glass. "Daniel," she said again, lower this time. "Who is she?" He swallowed, his eyes never left the boy. Catherine had already turned back to her table. She didn't look at Daniel again. That hurt more than any confrontation could have. 8 years ago, she had cried, begged, shaken in front of him. Tonight, she acted as if he were invisible. "That woman," Daniel finally said, his voice hoarse, "is my ex-wife." Vanessa froze. "Your what?" Her smile collapsed instantly. "You never said she had a child." "I didn't," Daniel replied, though the word tasted like a lie. Because deep down, he had known this moment might exist one day. He had just convinced himself it never would. Vanessa followed his gaze again. Her sharp eyes studied the boy's face carefully this time. The longer she looked, the more her expression changed. "That boy," she whispered, leaning closer. "He looks like you." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Lots of kids look alike." Vanessa let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't insult me." At the other table, Jonathan Reed leaned slightly toward Catherine. His voice was low, calm, but firm. "Are you okay?" Catherine nodded. Her fingers trembled just a little as she adjusted the napkin on her son's lap. "I knew this might happen someday," she said quietly. "I just didn't think it would be tonight." Leo swung his legs under the table, completely unaware of the emotional wreckage he had just caused. "Mom," he whispered, "did I do something wrong?" "No," Catherine said instantly, brushing his hair back. "You did nothing wrong." "It's so fraude." Jonathan's hand remained on Leo's shoulder, steady and protective. "You're perfect, buddy," he said. "Finish your cake before it melts." Leo smiled and obeyed. That smile nearly broke Daniel. 8 years ago, Catherine had stood in their apartment bathroom, pale and shaking, holding a pregnancy test. He had told her it wasn't the right time. That a child would ruin everything, that she had to think about his future. And now, that future was sitting 10 feet away, calling another man Dad. Daniel pushed his chair back abruptly. I need some air. Vanessa grabbed his arm. Don't you dare walk away from this, she hissed. If that child is… He's not, Daniel snapped too quickly. But Vanessa had already seen enough. Her mind was racing, calculating, connecting dots she didn't like. This is why, she said coldly. This is why she looks so calm. She won. Daniel shook his head. You don't understand. No, Vanessa replied, standing. I understand perfectly. She kept what you destroyed. And now she wants you to see it. Across the room, Catherine stood as well. She helped Leo into his coat while Jonathan signaled for the check. Her movements were graceful, unhurried. As they walked past Daniel's table, Catherine finally stopped. For one brief second, she looked directly at him. There are consequences, she said softly. Some just take time. Then she turned away. Daniel stood frozen, watching his son leave with another man, realizing too late that fate had never been something he could control. Daniel did not sleep that night. The image followed him home, burned behind his eyes. The boy's face, the way he laughed softly while eating dessert, the way Catherine had looked at him, calm, distant, finished. It was not hatred that haunted Daniel. It was finality. Vanessa paced their penthouse living room, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She had taken off her coat, but not her anger. So, she said at last, folding her arms. How long were you married to her? Daniel loosened his tie. 3 years. And you never once mentioned a pregnancy, Vanessa said. Not even as a possibility. Daniel stared at the dark city beyond the glass walls. Because there wasn't supposed to be one. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. That's not what I asked. He turned. I told her to take care of it. She agreed. Decidino. The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Agreed? Vanessa repeated slowly, or was pressured. That's enough, Daniel snapped. No, Vanessa shot back. It's not enough, because if that boy is 8, then the timing. She stopped herself, her expression hardening. You lied to me. Daniel said nothing. For the first time in years, he had no strategy. Across the city, Catherine sat on the edge of Leo's bed, watching him sleep. His chest rose and fell evenly, one hand curled around the corner of his blanket. Jonathan stood in the doorway, his presence quiet but solid. You handled that well, he said. Catherine let out a slow breath. I was shaking inside. Jonathan stepped closer. Do you regret going there? She shook her head. No. I regret that he exists in our world again, but not tonight. Jonathan sat beside her. Leo is safe. That's all that matters. Catherine looked up at him, her eyes glossy. Thank you for stepping in back there. Jonathan smiled faintly. I wasn't stepping in. I was standing where I belong. Back at the penthouse, Vanessa poured herself another drink. I want the truth, Daniel. All of it. Daniel hesitated, then spoke. She was pregnant. I panicked. I had just been offered a partnership. A child would have complicated everything. Vanessa laughed bitterly. So, you erased it? I thought I did. That was the moment Vanessa understood. Not just that Catherine's child was alive, but that Daniel had lost something he would never get back. You don't even look angry, she said. You look scared. Daniel clenched his jaw. That boy is mine. Vanessa stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. No, that boy is hers, and legally, he belongs to the man she married. Daniel's blood ran cold. What? Vanessa smiled thinly. You think a woman like her would leave something like that unprotected? For the first time, Daniel felt it, the fear he had never allowed himself to feel. He had built his life on control, on decisions that erased inconvenience. But somewhere along the way, the one thing he tried to destroy had survived. And now, it was calling someone else Dad. The next morning, Daniel Cross stared at his reflection longer than usual. For the first time in years, the man in the mirror looked unfamiliar. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tense, his confidence fractured by a single, undeniable image, a child who carried his face but not his name. Vanessa was already dressed, scrolling on her phone with sharp, impatient movements. She didn't look at him when she spoke. I canceled my shoot today, she said. I have more important things to deal with. Daniel poured himself coffee he didn't taste. This doesn't concern you. End quote. Vanessa finally looked up, her smile cold. Everything that threatens my marriage concerns me. Daniel exhaled slowly. You're overreacting. No, she replied. You're underreacting. That boy is 8 years old. which means Catherine didn't take care of it like you claimed. Daniel's grip tightened around the mug. I was told it was handled. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. By whom? You never went to the appointment with her, did you? Silence. That silence was answer enough. Across town, Catherine walked Leo to school like any other morning. His backpack bounced against his shoulders as he talked excitedly about a science project. She smiled, responded, stayed present, but her mind was somewhere else. Jonathan noticed. They won't bother us, he said gently as they watched Leo join his classmates. I made sure of that. Catherine nodded, though worry lingered in her eyes. Daniel doesn't like losing control. Jonathan's voice was calm but firm. He doesn't have any. Back in the penthouse, Vanessa was already 3 steps ahead. I hired a private investigator, she said casually, as if discussing groceries. Not for her, for you. Daniel stiffened. You had no right? I had every right, Vanessa shot back. I needed to know who I married. She turned the phone toward him. On the screen was a timeline. Dates, locations, medical records. Daniel's heart pounded. 8 years ago, Vanessa continued. You paid for a procedure, yes. But the records show Catherine never completed it. She left the clinic. That's impossible, Daniel whispered. Vanessa leaned closer. What's impossible is that you believed everything would disappear just because you wanted it to. Daniel's world tilted. That night, he drove past Catherine's neighborhood without thinking. He parked across the street, watching lights turn on inside a warm, modest house. Through the window, he saw it. Jonathan helping Leo with homework. Catherine setting plates on the table. Laughter soft, real, unforced. A family. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. That life should have been his. At the same moment, inside the house, Catherine paused mid-step. She felt it, the weight of being watched. Jonathan followed her gaze to the window. His expression didn't change, but his hand found hers. If he crosses a line, he said quietly, I'll end this. Catherine swallowed. I don't want a war. Jonathan looked at her steadily. Neither do I. But he already started one 8 years ago. Outside, Daniel finally understood the truth he had spent years avoiding. The child lived. The mother survived. And the family he tried to erase had grown stronger without him. And this time, there would be consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. Daniel told himself he was only there to see the truth with his own eyes. That was the lie he repeated as he sat in his car across the street from Catherine's house for the second night in a row. He wasn't stalking. He wasn't desperate. He was a father trying to understand what had been stolen from him. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was a man who had lost control and couldn't accept it. Inside the house, dinner was ending. Daniel watched through the window as Jonathan cleared the table, while Catherine wiped Leo's hands with quiet care. The boy laughed at something Jonathan said, his head tilting back in a way that made Daniel's chest ache. That laugh should have echoed in Daniel's life. Without thinking, Daniel opened his car door. He told himself he would only walk closer. Just enough to hear them. Just enough to confirm what he already knew. Halfway across the street, his phone buzzed. Vanessa. He ignored it. Then another buzz. And another. Finally, he answered. Where are you? Vanessa demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. Out, Daniel said shortly. Out where? She pressed. Because my investigator just sent me something interesting. Daniel stopped walking. What? He asked. Vanessa's voice dropped. Jonathan Reed didn't just marry her. He legally adopted that child 3 years ago. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. That's not possible, he said. I never signed anything. You didn't need to, Vanessa replied coldly. You erased yourself 8 years ago. The law didn't need your permission. Daniel's breath came faster. Adoption meant more than a last name. It meant finality. He's not yours anymore, Vanessa continued. And if you try to interfere, you'll lose everything you still have. Daniel hung up without responding. Across the street, the front door opened. Catherine stepped outside to take out the trash. The night air was cool, quiet. She froze when she saw him standing under the streetlight. Daniel, she said evenly, you shouldn't be here. I just want to talk, he said, his voice cracking despite himself. About him. Catherine's eyes hardened. You don't get to say that word. He's my son, Daniel insisted. No, she replied, stepping forward. You made sure he wouldn't be. Daniel reached out instinctively, but stopped when Jonathan appeared beside Catherine, placing himself firmly between them. "You need to leave," Jonathan said calmly. There was no threat in his voice. That made it worse. Daniel looked at him, fury and desperation colliding. "You think you won something?" Jonathan met his gaze. "I didn't win. I chose." That sentence cut deeper than any insult. Catherine's voice trembled, not with fear, but with resolve. "If you come near my child again, I will protect him with everything I have." Daniel looked past them, toward the warm light inside the house, where Leo's shadow moved across the wall. For the first time, Daniel understood something irreversible. This wasn't a story he could rewrite. And the moment he stepped back into the darkness, he realized the line he crossed tonight would cost him far more than he imagined. Daniel didn't go home after leaving Catherine's street. He drove aimlessly through the city, hands tight on the steering wheel, his mind spiraling around one brutal truth he could no longer deny. Leo was alive, growing, laughing, and legally belonged to another man. Every red light felt like an accusation. Every reflection in the glass buildings reminded him of the choices he had made 8 years ago, choices he had called necessary. His phone rang again. "Vanessa." This time, he answered. "You embarrassed yourself," she said without greeting. "Do you know how dangerous this is?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "Dangerous? I just found out I have a son." Vanessa's voice hardened. "No, you found out you lost one." Silence stretched between them. "I spoke to my lawyer," she continued. "If Catherine files a restraining order, your reputation won't survive it." A powerful investor stalking his ex-wife and her child? The headlines write themselves. Daniel closed his eyes. "What do you want?" "I want control," Vanessa replied bluntly. "And if that boy stays in your life, I won't have it." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Don't talk about him like that," Vanessa scoffed. "You're the one who erased him first." The line went dead. Across town, Catherine sat awake at the kitchen table long after Leo had fallen asleep. A single lamp cast soft light across the room. Jonathan stood by the counter, watching her quietly. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but tears slipped down her cheeks anyway. "I thought I was past this. I thought I was stronger." Jonathan crossed the room and knelt in front of her. "Strength isn't never hurting. It's choosing what matters when it does." Catherine wiped her face. "I'm scared he won't stop." Jonathan's expression turned serious. "Then we make sure he can't." The next morning, Daniel walked into his office to find tension thick in the air. Conversations stopped when he passed. His assistant avoided eye contact. "Daniel," his partner said, stepping into his office. "We need to talk." The door closed. "I just got off the phone with Reed Logistics," the partner continued. "They pulled out of the merger." Daniel's heart pounded. "What? Why?" "They didn't say." The man hesitated. "But the timing isn't great. There are concerns." Daniel knew exactly who was behind it. Jonathan Reed wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, but he was precise. By noon, 2 more deals stalled. By evening, Vanessa texted him a single sentence. "This is spiraling. Fix it." Desperate, Daniel did the one thing he never should have done. He ordered a private DNA test. He didn't approach Leo directly. Instead, he bribed a school contractor to retrieve a discarded cup, a hair from a jacket. It felt wrong. It felt illegal. But he needed proof. 3 days later, the email arrived. Probability of paternity? 99.9%. Daniel sank into his chair, chest heaving. It was true. And the moment he had proof was the moment everything collapsed. Because 5 minutes later, his phone rang again. This time, it was Jonathan. "I know what you did," Jonathan said calmly. "And this is your last warning." Daniel whispered. "He's my blood." Jonathan's reply was ice cold. "Blood doesn't make a father, choices do." The line disconnected. Daniel stared at the DNA report, realizing too late that his desperation had crossed into a crime and that the bill for it was finally coming due. The problem with secrets was never keeping them. It was what happened when they started to rot. Daniel Cross learned that lesson the hard way. The DNA report burned a hole through his briefcase as he walked into his office the next morning. 99.9%. There was no room for denial anymore. Leo was his son, flesh of his flesh. And yet, every legal document in existence said the child belonged to Jonathan Reed. Daniel had never felt so powerless. By noon, The consequences of his desperation began to surface. His assistant entered his office, pale and shaking. "There's someone here to see you," she whispered. "They say it's urgent." 2 men stepped inside before Daniel could respond. One was calm, sharply dressed. The other wore the unmistakable badge of a legal compliance officer. "Mr. Cross," the first man said evenly, "we need to discuss an unauthorized collection of biological material involving a minor." Daniel's blood drained from his face. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "I was verifying a personal matter." The compliance officer didn't flinch. "You bribed a contractor connected to a private school. That contractor has already confessed." Daniel felt the walls closing in. Across town, Catherine sat in Jonathan's office, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had just finished listening to everything: the DNA test, the bribe, the investigation. "He crossed a line," she said quietly. Jonathan nodded. "That's why I let it proceed." "If we won." Catherine looked up, startled. "You let it?" Jonathan's expression was steady. "I warned him. He ignored it. Some people only understand consequences when they can't buy their way out." Catherine swallowed. "Will Leo be okay?" Jonathan reached across the desk and took her hand. "I will make sure of it." Back at the office, Vanessa burst in unannounced, heels striking the floor like gunshots. "What did you do?" she demanded. "My lawyer is calling non-stop." "If you not my," Daniel snapped, "this is your fault." Vanessa laughed sharply. "No, this is who you are. You destroy things, then panic when they don't stay destroyed." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Do you know what happens if this goes public? Investors will run. Brands will drop me. Everything we built will collapse." Daniel slumped into his chair. For the first time, he looked small. Meanwhile, Leo sat at the kitchen table, coloring quietly. Catherine watched him, her heart heavy. "Mom," Leo said suddenly, "that man from the restaurant, why was he sad?" Catherine froze. Jonathan answered gently before she could. "Some people feel sad when they see what they lost." Leo nodded thoughtfully. "I like our family." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. That evening, Daniel received the final blow. A call from his senior partner. "We're suspending you," the man said flatly, "pending investigation. If you come of laxed." Daniel stared at the city lights outside his window, realization sinking in. The truth he had chased so desperately had turned into a weapon, one aimed straight at him. And for the first time, Daniel understood something chilling. Knowing the truth didn't make him a father. It made him a threat. And threats didn't get forgiven. Vanessa Cole had always believed that silence could be controlled. For 8 years, she had smiled for cameras, walked runways, built a flawless image beside a powerful husband. She knew how to hide cracks. She knew how to pose through discomfort. But now, as she sat alone in their penthouse, staring at her phone, the silence felt different. It felt dangerous. Daniel hadn't come home. Again. Vanessa poured herself a drink she didn't want and replayed the messages she had ignored over the years. Appointments canceled, doctors avoiding direct answers, the quiet questions she had buried too deep to face. "Why haven't I gotten pregnant?" Her phone vibrated. A message from her lawyer. "You need to come in. Immediately." At the same time, across the city, Catherine sat in a small conference room with Jonathan and their attorney. The atmosphere was calm, but heavy. "The DNA test changes things," the attorney said carefully. "Not in Daniel's favor. But it does escalate his instability." Catherine's hands tightened in her lap. "What does that mean for Leo?" Jonathan answered before the attorney could. "It means we protect him, fully." The attorney nodded. "We're filing for a formal protective order. Given Daniel's actions, it will be granted." Catherine exhaled slowly. "I never wanted to hurt him." Jonathan looked at her gently. "You're not hurting him. His choices are." Meanwhile, Vanessa sat across from her lawyer, her confidence slowly draining with every sentence. "Medical records confirm it," the lawyer said. "Daniel underwent a voluntary sterilization procedure 8 years ago." Vanessa's ears rang. "That's not possible." "He did it without informing you," the lawyer continued, "which means the infertility was never yours." The truth landed like a slap. All those years of quiet shame. The whispers, the self-blame. Vanessa laughed once, sharp and hollow. "He let me believe it was my fault." "Yes," the lawyer said softly, "he did." That night, Daniel finally returned home. Vanessa was waiting in the dark. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked calmly. Daniel froze. "Tell you what? That you made sure I could never have a child with you," Vanessa said, her voice deadly quiet. Daniel said nothing. Vanessa nodded slowly. "You used me. Just like you tried to erase her." Daniel snapped. "You wanted the life. I gave it to you." Vanessa stepped back, disgusted. "I wanted a family. You wanted control." She grabbed her coat. "I'm leaving." Daniel laughed bitterly. "You won't survive without me." Vanessa turned at the door. "Watch me." At the same moment, Catherine tucked Leo into bed. He looked up at her sleepily. "Mom," he murmured. "Dad said, everything will be okay." Catherine smiled, brushing his hair back. "Your dad is right." Down the hall, Jonathan stood quietly, phone in hand. The protective order had been approved. Effective immediately. Outside, the city buzzed on, unaware that one family was finally safe, and another was beginning to collapse from the inside. Daniel Cross had lost control of the narrative, and Vanessa had just realized she was never the winner. News doesn't explode all at once. It leaks. At first, Daniel Cross thought he could contain it. A compliance inquiry here, a postponed deal there, quiet phone calls, closed-door meetings. He told himself it would blow over, just like everything else always had. But this time, the silence didn't protect him. It isolated him. By Monday morning, his inbox was full of messages that said nothing and meant everything. "We're reviewing our position. Let's circle back next quarter. Given recent developments, we're stepping away." Daniel sat alone in his office, jacket still on, watching his career dissolve line by line. Across town, Catherine stood at Leo's school gate, smiling as he ran toward her with his backpack bouncing. The world felt strangely normal. Too normal. "Mom," Leo said, "Dad's picking me up today, right?" "Yes," she answered gently. "He'll be here soon." And he was. Jonathan's car pulled up, smooth and unhurried. He stepped out, greeted Leo, ruffled his hair. Other parents nodded politely. Jonathan belonged here, he always had. Catherine watched them, a tight knot loosening in her chest. Back in Daniel's world, Vanessa packed her things with methodical precision. No tears, no yelling. She had already cried enough over the wrong things. "You should issue a statement," Daniel said, standing helplessly in the doorway. "Say we're working through things." Vanessa didn't look at him. "I'm done covering for you." "You're making a mistake," he snapped. "You'll regret this." However, Vanessa zipped her suitcase and finally turned. "The only thing I regret is not leaving sooner." She paused at the door. "I spoke to a journalist today." Daniel's heart stopped. "What?" "I didn't give her everything," Vanessa said calmly. "Just enough to protect myself." "You wouldn't," Daniel whispered. "I would," she replied. "Because you taught me how." She left without another word. That afternoon, Catherine received a call from their attorney. "He's unraveling," the lawyer said, "which makes him dangerous but also predictable." Catherine closed her eyes. "What does he want now?" "Access," the lawyer answered. "Not legally, emotionally. He wants leverage." As if summoned by the thought, Catherine's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I deserve to know him. You can't keep him from me forever." Her hands trembled, but her reply was steady. "He is protected. Do not contact me again." She blocked the number. That evening, Daniel sat alone in the penthouse, surrounded by things that suddenly felt meaningless. Awards, art, glass walls that reflected his isolation. On the coffee table lay a printed photo his investigator had taken weeks ago. Leo, laughing, alive, untouchable. Daniel stared at it, rage and grief twisting together. He whispered into the empty room, "I won't lose him." But across the city, Jonathan signed final paperwork with quiet determination. A restraining order extension. A security upgrade. A future sealed shut. Daniel had spent his life believing power meant taking. He was about to learn that real power meant being locked out, and watching the life you destroyed move on without you. Daniel Cross finally understood what it felt like to be hunted. For the first time in his life, every move he made seemed anticipated. Every door he tried to open closed quietly before he reached it. His calls went unanswered. His messages were read but ignored. Even the people who once needed him now treated him like a liability they couldn't afford. That terrified him. Desperation has a way of sharpening reckless ideas, and Daniel had reached that stage. If he couldn't control the narrative through power, money, or silence, then he would force an emotional opening. He would go straight to the one person who could still shake Catherine. The child. Late one afternoon, Daniel parked near Leo's school. He told himself he was only there to watch. Just to see him again. Just once. Parents gathered near the gate, chatting, checking phones, calling out names. Daniel kept his head down, heart pounding, palms damp. When the bell rang, children poured out in a rush of laughter and noise. Then he saw him. Leo stepped through the gate, backpack slung over one shoulder, smiling as he spotted Jonathan waiting near the curb. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. That was my son. Before Daniel could take a step forward, everything changed. A hand landed firmly on his shoulder. "Mr. Cross," a calm voice said behind him. "I'm going to need you to step away from the school." Daniel turned sharply. Two men stood there. One wore a discreet security badge. The other held a tablet. "I'm not doing anything wrong," Daniel said quickly. "I'm just violating a protective order," the man interrupted evenly. "This location is listed explicitly." Daniel's breath caught. "That's ridiculous." End quote. "Is it?" the second man asked, tapping the screen. "You were warned." Across the street, Catherine stood frozen as she watched the scene unfold. Jonathan had already placed himself in front of Leo, one arm protective, his face unreadable. "Mom?" Leo asked quietly. "Why is that man here?" Catherine swallowed hard. She forced herself to kneel and meet her son's eyes. "He made a mistake," she said gently. "And mistakes have consequences." Daniel struggled as security guided him back. "Catherine," he shouted, "you can't do this. He's my blood." Catherine stood slowly, her voice steady but carrying. "You gave up that right," she said, 8 years ago." The words hit harder than any court ruling ever could. Minutes later, police arrived. No sirens, no spectacle, just quiet efficiency. Daniel was escorted away in front of watching parents, their whispers following him like shadows. That evening, headlines began to circulate, not dramatic, but devastating. Prominent investor under investigation for harassment and misconduct. Restraining order violations raised concerns. Vanessa saw the news from a hotel room across the city. She didn't feel satisfaction, only confirmation. Back at home, Catherine sat between Jonathan and Leo on the couch. Leo leaned into Jonathan's side, safe, unshaken. "Dad," Leo said softly, "are we okay?" Jonathan kissed the top of his head. "We are more than okay. And 72. Haven't we do doth?" Catherine looked at the two people who mattered most and felt something settle deep inside her chest. Daniel had tried one last time to take what he believed was his. Instead, he had proven to the world exactly why he never deserved it. The first court hearing did not feel dramatic. That was what unsettled Daniel the most. There were no cameras flashing, no shouting reporters, no grand speeches, just a quiet courtroom, pale walls, and a judge who looked at him not with curiosity, but with concern. Daniel had always been admired, envied, feared. This was the first time he felt examined. Catherine sat several rows behind him, calm and composed. Jonathan sat beside her, his presence steady, protective, without being possessive. They did not look at Daniel once. That hurt more than anger ever could. The judge spoke clearly. "Mr. Cross, you violated a court-issued protective order involving a minor. Do you understand the seriousness of this action?" Daniel's lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, my client was acting out of emotional distress. He recently learned—" "I didn't ask why," the judge interrupted. "I asked if he understands." Daniel swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." Across the room, Catherine closed her eyes briefly. Emotional distress. 8 years ago, no one had cared about hers. The hearing moved quickly. Evidence presented, timelines established, witness statements summarized. Each fact landed like another nail, sealing a door Daniel still believed might reopen. Then something unexpected happened. "Your Honor," another attorney said, standing, "we have an additional statement to submit." Daniel turned, confused. Vanessa Cole walked into the courtroom. She looked different. No runway confidence, no polished smile. Just a woman who looked tired of carrying lies that were never hers to begin with. Daniel's heart sank. Vanessa faced the judge. "I'm here to testify voluntarily," she said evenly. regarding Mr. Cross's behavior, his actions during our marriage, and his history of manipulation. Daniel whispered. Vanessa. She didn't look at him. Vanessa spoke calmly, but every word cut deep. She described control masked as protection, decisions made without consent, medical truths hidden, how she had been blamed for infertility she never had. Murmurs filled the courtroom. Catherine felt Jonathan's hand tighten around hers. Not to stop her, to steady her. The judge listened carefully, then turned back to Daniel. Mr. Cross, given this testimony and your recent actions, this court will extend the protective order indefinitely. Daniel stood abruptly. You're taking everything from me. The judge's voice was firm. No, your choices did that. If you were a stow. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered. This time, the story had shifted. It wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about a pattern. Daniel was escorted out through a side exit. Catherine stepped into the sunlight, blinking. She expected to feel triumphant. Instead, she felt something quieter. Relief. Jonathan turned to her. You okay? She nodded. I think this is the end. Jonathan smiled softly. No, this is the beginning. That night, Catherine tucked Leo into bed. He looked up at her, serious. Mom, he asked, bad things don't come back if you close the door, right? She kissed his forehead. Not if you lock it with the truth. Down the hall, Jonathan watched them, knowing something Daniel never would. Some doors close forever, and the people on the other side don't get to knock again. After the hearing, life did not suddenly become perfect. That was something Catherine understood deeply. Justice did not arrive like fireworks. It came quietly, in the form of uninterrupted mornings, steady routines, and the absence of fear. And for the first time in 8 years, silence no longer felt dangerous. The protective order changed everything. Daniel was no longer allowed within a certain distance of Catherine or Leo. His name stopped appearing in her inbox, on her phone, in the back of her mind. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for years began to ease. Little by little, at school, Leo laughed again without hesitation. He slept through the night. He stopped asking why grown-ups whispered. One evening, Catherine stood at the kitchen counter, washing dishes, while Jonathan helped Leo with homework at the table. It was an ordinary scene, almost boring. And that was what made it beautiful. Dad, Leo said, frowning at his paper, is this answer right? Jonathan leaned over, patient. Let's look at it together, he thanked. Catherine paused, her hands still submerged in warm water. He said it so naturally now. Dad. Later that night, after Leo was asleep, Catherine sat on the couch, staring at nothing in particular. Jonathan joined her, handing her a mug of tea. You've been quiet, he said. She smiled faintly. I was just thinking about how loud my life used to be. Jonathan sat beside her. And now? Now it's calm, she replied. And part of me is scared that calm won't last. As Wano. Jonathan reached for her hand. It will. Because we built it. Not on lies, not on fear. Across the city, Daniel sat alone in a short-term apartment paid for by a lawyer who no longer returned his calls promptly. His accounts were frozen pending investigation. His name was toxic. The silence around him wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. He replayed the hearing in his mind, especially Vanessa's testimony. He had always believed she needed him. Now he understood she had simply survived him. Daniel opened his laptop and searched Catherine's name. Nothing. No interviews, no statements, no public victory lap. She had erased him without making a sound. Back at home, Catherine opened a small box she had kept hidden for years. Inside was an old ultrasound photo, faded, folded, carried across states and seasons. She looked at it once more, then placed it gently back inside. She didn't need it anymore. Jonathan watched her from the doorway. Ready to let that go? She nodded. I think I already have. That weekend, they took Leo to the park. He ran ahead, shouting, carefree. Jonathan wrapped an arm around Catherine's shoulders. You know, he said quietly, we never really celebrated becoming a family. Catherine looked up at him. Do we need to? Jonathan smiled. I think we deserve to. In that moment, Catherine felt something settle deep inside her chest. Not excitement, not relief, but certainty. The storm had passed. And what remained wasn't just survival. It was a life she had earned. Catherine didn't notice the change at first. It wasn't dramatic. There were no sudden gestures or emotional speeches. It was simply the way Jonathan started paying attention to the small things again. The way she preferred her coffee slightly cooler, how she folded laundry by category, how she paused before answering questions that touched old wounds. He watched her more closely now. Not out of concern, but intention. One evening, after Leo had gone to bed, Jonathan asked casually, "Do you remember the first night we met?" Catherine smiled faintly. "You were late, and you apologized 3 times. Jonathan chuckled. "I was nervous." "You never look nervous," she teased. "That's because I don't let people see it," he replied. Then, more softly, "Except you." Catherine felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with something warmer, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Across the city, Daniel watched the same moon from a narrow balcony, the city lights below feeling colder than ever. His lawyer had officially withdrawn that morning. Vanessa had blocked his number. Even his parents had stopped calling. For the first time, there was no one left to blame. Back in Catherine's world, Jonathan suggested a weekend away. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet coastal town, a place where Leo could play on the beach and fall asleep exhausted from happiness. They left early Saturday morning. Leo ran ahead the moment they arrived, shoes in hand, laughter carried by the wind. Catherine watched him, a smile tugging at her lips. Jonathan stood beside her. "He's grown so much." She nodded. "Sometimes I forget how fast." That evening, after Leo fell asleep in the hotel room, Jonathan asked Catherine to join him for a short walk along the shore. The beach was nearly empty, the sky painted in deep blues and soft golds. "Catherine," Jonathan said, stopping near the water's edge. She turned toward him. "I've never tried to fix you," he continued quietly. "I've never wanted to erase what you went through. I just wanted to stand beside you while you healed." Her eyes filled with tears. Jonathan took a breath. "I know we're already a family. I know papers don't define love. But I want the world to know what I know." He reached into his coat pocket. Catherine froze. Jonathan knelt in the sand, holding a simple ring, elegant, understated, chosen with care. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Not because you need safety, not because you owe me anything, but because you choose me." "Every day." Catherine covered her mouth, tears slipping free. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Jonathan stood, pulling her into his arms as the waves rolled in behind them. Miles away, Daniel stared at an engagement announcement on his phone. A mutual acquaintance, a single photo. Catherine smiling, Jonathan beside her, Leo between them. A family. Daniel closed his eyes. This time, the loss was complete. On the beach, Catherine rested her head against Jonathan's chest, the sound of his heartbeat steady and real. For the first time, her future felt light. Not because the past was erased, but because she had finally been chosen and had chosen back. The news traveled faster than Catherine expected. It wasn't flashy. There were no magazine covers or dramatic interviews. Just a quiet engagement announcement shared by friends, a few congratulatory messages, and one photo taken on the beach, Jonathan standing behind her, Leo between them, all three smiling into the sunset. But for Daniel, it felt like a public execution. He stared at the image on his phone long after the screen dimmed. Catherine looked different, not triumphant, not vengeful, just at peace. The kind of peace he had spent his life chasing and never understood. The wedding was planned simply. Catherine didn't want spectacle, she wanted meaning. A small ceremony by the water. Close friends, family. Leo wearing a tiny suit, standing proudly between them, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. On the morning of the wedding, Catherine stood in front of the mirror, her dress understated and elegant. She touched the fabric lightly, grounding herself. "You ready?" Jonathan asked from the doorway. She turned, smiling. "I've been ready for a long time." Leo ran in, excitement written all over his face. "Dad, Mom, can I hold the rings now?" Jonathan laughed. "That's your most important job today." Across the city, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, the wedding invitation unopened on the table. He hadn't been invited. He hadn't expected to be. Still, seeing the envelope addressed only to former associates burned. Vanessa's name surfaced briefly in his thoughts. She was gone now, new city, new life, interviews where she spoke carefully about learning to choose herself. She had survived him too. At the ceremony, the ocean breeze carried Jonathan's vows clearly. "I promise to choose you," he said, looking directly at Catherine. "Not just when it's easy, but when it's quiet, when it's hard, when the past tries to speak louder than the present." Catherine's voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "I promise to trust again, to build, not hide, to love you and our son with everything I have." Leo beamed as he handed over the rings. When the officiant declared them married, applause rose softly, genuine and warm. Later that evening, as guests mingled, Catherine watched Jonathan and Leo laughing together. She felt something close to disbelief. This was real. Miles away, Daniel watched the sun set through his apartment window. His phone buzzed once more, a final notification from his former firm. Board decision finalized. "Your separation is permanent." Daniel set the phone down. For years, he had believed abandoning Catherine was a calculated risk, a necessary sacrifice. He had told himself some losses were acceptable. Standing alone in the quiet, Daniel finally understood the truth. He hadn't lost her because she left. He lost everything the moment he decided control mattered more than love. Back at the reception, Leo ran up to Catherine and hugged her tightly. "I'm glad you're happy, Mom," he said. She knelt and kissed his forehead. "So am I." As the lights dimmed and music filled the air, Catherine took Jonathan's hand, her future steady and bright. And somewhere far away, Daniel Cross sat with nothing but regret, a spectator to a life that would never include him again. Daniel Cross thought the worst was over. That belief lasted exactly 3 days after the wedding. The world had already turned its back on him. His career was gone. His marriage was ashes. His reputation had become a quiet warning whispered in boardrooms. He was no longer welcome in. What remained was only one thing he refused to let go of: the idea that Leo still belonged to him. On a gray Tuesday morning, Catherine received a call from her attorney. "Daniel has filed a petition," the lawyer said carefully. "Not for custody. Not exactly." Catherine's heart skipped. "Then what?" "He's requesting a court-ordered paternity acknowledgement," the lawyer replied. "He claims he has new evidence and is seeking limited recognition." Jonathan, standing nearby, went completely still. Catherine closed her eyes. "He's still trying." "Yes," the lawyer said, "but this won't go the way he thinks." Daniel sat in a near-empty cafe, hands shaking slightly as he stared at the filed documents on his tablet. This was his last move. Not loud, not emotional, legal, clean. If the court acknowledged biological paternity, even without rights, he believed it would crack something open. A door. A connection. A claim. What Daniel didn't know was that this move had already sealed his fate. In the courtroom, weeks later, Catherine sat calmly beside Jonathan. Leo was not present. He was protected from this moment, as he always had been. Daniel stood alone at the opposite table. The judge reviewed the petition silently, then looked up. "Mr. Cross," she said, "you are requesting recognition without responsibility." Daniel swallowed. "I'm requesting truth." The judge's eyes were sharp. Truth without accountability is not truth, it's entitlement. Daniel's lawyer tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "This court has reviewed your history," she continued. "Your abandonment, the protective order violations, the illegal DNA collection, and your lack of involvement for 8 years. She turned to Catherine. "Mrs. Reed, your husband legally adopted this child. He has provided stability, care, and protection." Then back to Daniel. "You," the judge said calmly, "provided fear." Daniel's face drained of color. The judge delivered her ruling clearly. This petition is denied. Furthermore, this court orders that any future attempts to contact or identify the child publicly will be considered harassment. The gavel struck once. It was over. Daniel didn't react right away. He simply stood there, frozen, as if waiting for something else to happen, something to save him. Nothing did. Outside the courthouse, Catherine exhaled slowly. Jonathan took her hand. "He can't touch us anymore," he said. She nodded, tears slipping free not from pain, but release. That night, Jonathan tucked Leo into bed. Catherine watched from the doorway. "Dad," Leo said sleepily, "can we go to the park this weekend?" Jonathan smiled. "Of course. If you manas." Catherine turned away, her chest full. Miles away, Daniel sat alone in the dark, the final ruling open on his screen. No appeal, no loophole, no more moves. For the first time, he understood the full weight of what he had done. He hadn't lost his son because another man took him. He lost him because he chose power over love, and love never came back. Time did not heal Daniel Cross. It clarified his punishment. Months passed after the court's final decision, but nothing softened the edges of his loss. The world moved on with quiet efficiency, and Daniel was left standing still, watching from the outside. His name no longer opened doors. His face no longer belonged in the rooms where power gathered. Even old acquaintances crossed the street to avoid uncomfortable conversations. He had become a reminder, and no one liked reminders. One afternoon, Daniel found himself walking past a familiar park. He hadn't planned it. His feet simply carried him there, guided by memory instead of reason. He stopped at the edge of the iron fence, hands in his coat pockets, watching families move through the late sunlight. Then he saw them. Catherine sat on a bench beneath a tree, sunglasses perched on her head, laughing softly. Jonathan stood nearby, pushing Leo on a swing. Leo's laughter rang out free, unguarded, full. "Higher, Dad," Leo called. Jonathan laughed. "Hold on tight. He's Fred's." Daniel's chest tightened, painfully. "Dad." Not once did Leo look around for anyone else. Not once did his eyes search for something missing. He was whole, complete, loved. Daniel stepped back instinctively, hiding behind the trunk of a tree, ashamed of his own presence. He knew the protective order's boundaries by heart now. He stayed well beyond them. He had learned, finally, how to obey. Catherine noticed Jonathan watching Leo and smiled. She leaned into him easily, naturally, like a woman who no longer carried fear in her body. "You okay?" Jonathan asked. She nodded. "Just thinking how fast he's growing." Jonathan squeezed her hand. "We're doing good." She smiled. "We really are." That single sentence destroyed Daniel more than any courtroom ruling ever had. Because it confirmed what he could no longer deny. They didn't need him. They never would. That night, Daniel returned to his empty apartment. The silence pressed in from every corner. No laughter, no questions, no future plans scribbled on calendars. Just the echo of decisions he could never undo. He opened a drawer and pulled out the DNA report. He hadn't thrown it away. Not because it mattered, but because it hurt. 99.9%. Proof without purpose. Across town, Catherine and Jonathan tucked Leo into bed. He held a book against his chest, eyes already heavy with sleep. "Mom," Leo murmured, "did I always have this family?" Catherine paused, choosing her words carefully. "You always had love," she said. "Sometimes it just takes time to find the right place for it." Leo smiled sleepily. "I like where it ended up." Jonathan kissed his forehead. "Me too." Later, Catherine stood at the window, watching the city lights glow. Jonathan joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You ever think about him?" Jonathan asked quietly. She did not hesitate. "No," she said honestly. "I think about us." Jonathan smiled, resting his chin on her shoulder. Somewhere in the city, Daniel Cross sat alone, staring at a life he could see but would never touch. He had wanted ownership. He had demanded control. And in the end, the greatest punishment was simple and absolute. He was alive but forever excluded from the only life that truly mattered. Daniel Cross learned that disgrace doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it settles in quietly, like dust, until everything you touch feels dirty. Months after the court's final ruling, his name surfaced one last time, not in headlines about power or wealth, but in a dry industry notice buried deep in a financial column. Former investor Daniel Cross permanently barred from advisory roles following ethical violations. No photo, no interview, no defense, just a conclusion. Daniel read the notice 3 times in a cafe where no one recognized him anymore. The barista called out his order using the wrong name. He didn't correct her. What would be the point? Across town, Catherine stood in a sunlit kitchen, helping Leo pack his backpack for a school field trip. Jonathan poured coffee, listening as Leo excitedly explained the schedule for the day. "You're coming, right?" Leo asked Jonathan. Jonathan smiled. "Wouldn't miss it. If you 4 more, if you 4 more." Catherine watched them, a soft warmth settling in her chest. There was no tension in her body now, no flinch when the phone rang, no instinct to look over her shoulder. The war was truly over. That afternoon, Catherine received an unexpected email from Vanessa Cole. The subject line read simply, "Closure." Catherine stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Vanessa's message was brief, stripped of performance. "I won't pretend we're friends, but I wanted you to know this. I'm sorry. I didn't understand what he was until it was too late. I won't defend him anymore. I hope you and your family are well." There was no excuse, no plea for forgiveness. Catherine closed the email without replying. She didn't need to. That evening, Daniel stood outside a bookstore, staring through the glass. Inside, families browsed together. A man crouched to show a child a picture book. A woman laughed softly beside them. Daniel felt the familiar ache rise again, but this time, something else followed. Acceptance. He finally understood that regret did not entitle him to redemption. That remorse did not reopen doors. That knowing the truth did not mean he deserved a place in it. He walked away. At home, Catherine and Jonathan sat on the couch while Leo lay on the floor, building something elaborate out of blocks. "Look," Leo announced proudly. "It's our house." Jonathan leaned forward. "That's a good one. Thank you for watching." Catherine smiled. "It looks strong." Leo nodded seriously. "Because it has everyone." That night, after Leo fell asleep, Catherine stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her wedding ring. She remembered the woman she had been 8 years ago, small, frightened, convinced she had lost everything. She hadn't. She had lost a man who didn't deserve her, and gained a life that did. Somewhere in the city, Daniel Cross turned off his phone for the last time. No one called. And that, finally, was his sentence. Years later, Daniel Cross became a name people barely remembered. That was the cruelest part. Not the lawsuits, not the financial collapse, not even the isolation. It was the quiet erasure, the way the world simply adjusted without him, as if he had never mattered as much as he believed. One rainy afternoon, Daniel sat in a small public library, scrolling through old articles on a cracked tablet. His own name appeared only in archived footnotes now, referenced briefly in stories about ethics reform and corporate cautionary tales. Former investor Daniel Cross? Always former, never present. Across the city, Catherine stood in the audience of a school auditorium, clapping as Leo stepped onto the stage for his first public presentation. He wore a navy blazer that Jonathan had helped him button that morning. He stood tall, confident, unafraid. Jonathan watched from the aisle, phone raised to record, his eyes shining with pride. Leo spoke clearly. "My project is about family. Family isn't just who you're born from, it's who shows up." The applause was immediate. Catherine pressed her fingers to her lips, overwhelmed. She didn't cry. She smiled. This was the future she had fought for without ever raising her voice. Later that night, Jonathan framed a photo from the presentation and placed it on the mantel. Leo pointed at it proudly. "That's my legacy," he said. Jonathan laughed. "You're just getting started." Meanwhile, Daniel sat alone in a rented room that smelled faintly of mildew and old paper. His phone buzzed once, a notification from a legal database confirming the final closure of his remaining appeals. No next steps. No reconsideration. Daniel stared at the screen for a long time, then powered the phone off. He walked to the window and looked down at the street below. People passed by, laughing, arguing, living. None of them noticed him. None of them needed to. For the first time, Daniel allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had lost. Not just a child, but the chance to be remembered by one. Legacy, he realized too late, wasn't built with money or control. It was built with presence. And he had chosen absence. Across town, Catherine and Jonathan sat at the kitchen table, helping Leo plan a family trip. Maps were spread out, ideas bouncing between them. "Can we go somewhere with mountains?" Leo asked. Jonathan nodded. "Absolutely." Catherine smiled. "And lakes." Leo grinned. "And s'mores." That night, Catherine lay in bed beside Jonathan, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. She thought briefly of the man she once loved, the man who had tried to erase her and her child. She felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no bitterness, only distance. Somewhere in the city, Daniel Cross turned off the lights and lay down alone, surrounded by the echoes of choices no apology could fix. He had wanted a legacy. Instead, he left behind a lesson. And the world moved on. The invitation arrived on thick, cream-colored paper. Catherine held it for a moment before opening it, already knowing what it was. Jonathan watched her from across the kitchen table, Leo beside him, focused on building something out of paper and tape. "What is it?" Jonathan asked gently. "A charity gala," Catherine said, reading the card. "Children's Health Initiative. They're honoring donors and families who helped build the new wing." Jonathan smiled. "That's you." Catherine hesitated. "Daniel's name will probably be there. On some old donor wall." Jonathan reached for her hand. "Do you want to go?" She thought about it carefully, not with fear, with honesty. "Yes," she said finally, "I do." Eat. The gala was held in a grand hall overlooking the river, lights reflecting softly against tall glass windows. Guests moved through the room in elegant clothes, laughter and quiet conversations blending into a low hum. Catherine walked in holding Jonathan's arm, Leo between them in a neat suit, his hair carefully combed. They belonged. Near the entrance stood a long digital display honoring past contributors. Names scrolled slowly, some active, some marked former. Catherine didn't stop walking. But Jonathan glanced over. Daniel Cross's name appeared briefly. Former contributor. They passed without comment. Inside the hall, Catherine was greeted warmly. Former colleagues, doctors, board members. People who knew her not as someone's ex-wife, but as a woman who had built something meaningful. Leo tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, there's my picture. It's Irician." On one wall was a photo from the school presentation, Leo standing proudly with his project, Jonathan and Catherine smiling behind him. "That's you," Catherine said softly. Leo grinned. "Dad helped me practice." Jonathan squeezed his shoulder. "You did the work." Applause rippled through the room as the host stepped onto the stage. "Tonight," she said, "we honor families who remind us why this work matters." Catherine felt Jonathan's hand tighten around hers as their names were called. They walked onto the stage together. Catherine looked out at the crowd and felt no nerves. No fear of the past catching up to her. Only gratitude. This wasn't about redemption, she said, simply into the microphone. It was about choosing love when fear felt easier. The room applauded. At the back of the hall, unnoticed by most, Daniel stood near the exit. He hadn't been invited, but he had come anyway. He watched from the shadows as Catherine spoke, as Jonathan stood beside her, as Leo waved shyly at the crowd. No one looked at Daniel. No one recognized him. No one cared. A security guard approached quietly. "Sir, this area is for guests only." Daniel nodded. "I know." He left without argument. Outside, the night air was cool and indifferent. Daniel paused once, looking back at the glowing windows, at the life unfolding without him. Then he turned away. Inside, Catherine stepped down from the stage and knelt to Leo's level. "You okay?" she asked. Leo nodded. "I'm proud of us." Catherine hugged him tightly. And in that moment, surrounded by warmth and certainty, she understood something with absolute clarity. The past had no power here anymore. It didn't follow her. It didn't haunt her. It didn't belong. The morning after the gala, Catherine woke to sunlight spilling softly across the bedroom floor. It was quiet. Not the heavy silence she once feared, but the gentle kind, the kind that came from knowing nothing bad was waiting to happen. Jonathan was already awake, standing by the window, reading emails on his phone. He looked over and smiled when he saw her stir. "Good morning," he said. Catherine stretched, smiling back. "Good morning." From down the hall came the sound of footsteps. Then Leo burst in without knocking, hair messy, eyes bright. "Dad," he said excitedly, "you promised pancakes." This nodded. Jonathan laughed. "I did. And I keep my promises." Catherine watched them walk out together, her chest filling with a warmth she no longer questioned. This was her life now. Ordinary. Safe. Real. Later that day, they drove out of the city for a short trip, no destination that mattered, just time together. Leo sat in the back seat, humming to himself, flipping through a book about space. "Mom," he asked suddenly, "do you think people get what they deserve?" Catherine glanced at Jonathan, then back at her son. "I think," she said carefully, "people get what they choose to build." Leo considered this, then nodded. "I like what we built." Jonathan reached back and squeezed Leo's knee. "Me too, buddy." Miles away, in a part of the city that no longer intersected with their lives, Daniel Cross packed the last of his belongings into a small suitcase. There was no one helping him, no one waiting, His phone stayed dark on the table. He paused once, holding an old photograph he had kept for too long, an image of a life that never existed. He set it down, finally understanding that some doors didn't close out of cruelty, but necessity. He left the apartment key on the counter and walked out without looking back. Back at home, Catherine stood in the kitchen that evening, watching Jonathan and Leo work together on a school project. They argued lightly, laughed, compromised. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was family. Jonathan caught her watching and smiled. "You okay over there?" Catherine nodded, emotion thick in her throat. "I just realized something." "What?" She walked over, resting her hand on Leo's shoulder, her other on Jonathan's arm. "I didn't lose anything back then. I was redirected." Jonathan looked at her, eyes soft. "To where you belonged. To 7. To 7. To 7. That night, after Leo fell asleep, Catherine stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, the sky clear. Jonathan joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "No more chapters left," he said quietly. Catherine leaned into him. "No, just living." Somewhere far away, Daniel Cross faded into anonymity. No final confrontation, no redemption arc, no audience. And that was the point. Because the true ending wasn't about him. It was about a woman who survived, a child who was loved, and a life that spoke louder than any revenge ever could. Catherine closed her eyes, breathing in peace. At last, the story had ended exactly where it should. So, this is where the story truly closes. And if you're still here with us at this very moment, then something in this journey has touched your heart in a quiet, personal way. Stories like this don't keep us listening by accident. They stay with us because, somewhere between the pain, the loss, and the healing, we see parts of our own lives reflected back at us. What this story reminds us is simple but powerful. Not everything we lose is a loss. Sometimes, what feels like the most brutal ending is actually life redirecting us to something healthier, safer, and more honest. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Catherine didn't win by revenge. She healed by choosing dignity, truth, and peace. And in doing so, she built a life that no one could take from her. If you're going through something painful right now, remember this. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning who no longer gets access to your heart. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Living well is already the loudest answer. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us reach more hearts like yours. Thank you for staying until the end, and remember, your story isn't over yet.